Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Jeff, and today we're going to be taking a look at my 1984 Porsche 944. So I bought this car a little over a year ago at this point, and I bought it for just $5,000. Now, if you're tracking some of the different car markets and things, these cars are now worth considerably more than $5,000. So I would say that was a pretty good investment. Now, granted, I don't want to say I bought it as an investment car. I bought it because I wanted it. It's a beautiful car, and today I'm going to be telling you all about it. So let's go ahead and let's get started. So this is a 1984 Porsche 944, so that means this is going to be an early car. Looking at the front bumpers here, you can also see it's a US spec car, so the US spec sticks out a little bit more because they have some shocks, or some struts I should say, that sit behind this bumper, so when it gets impacted, the struts actually take the most of the impact, and then that was able to meet the US regulations as far as crash safety. Same thing on the rear, it sticks out a little bit more, but the Euro cars, it sticks in. Now later in the 944's production run, you would actually see the essentially the turbo car would come in, and the turbo has a totally different front valence, and even has the rear valence that changes a little bit more, and then you can recognize it's a turbo. But this car is pre-turbo, so this is the fastest 944 that existed in 1984, and Car and Driver even gave the 1984 Porsche 944 essentially European Car of the Year, where they would then later compete against the American Car of the Year in a head-to-head competition. So that's super cool. That's one of the many reasons that I really love this car. So let's go ahead and let's talk about some of the other details. So the 944 was essentially the successor to the 924. The 924 was essentially first built for Volkswagen, and the 944 is when Porsche decided that they wanted to make the 924 an actual Porsche. So this features a 2.5 liter Porsche engine that I'll be showing you later, and then all the other Porsche goodies that go into it, including a transaxle in the back, giving this car essentially a 50-50 weight distribution with the engine in the front and the transmission in the back. So very cool car. So let's go ahead and let's start taking a look, and I'll go ahead and pop the engine for you. So in the interior, latch is underneath, and then a nice subtle door close sound for the Porsche. Oh, that's good stuff. So let's go ahead, pop it. Normal hood latch on this one, unlike the SL500. So what do we have in here? So in here is a 2.5 liter Porsche inline 4. The great part about this, if you can't tell by looking at some of the things like the valve cover, is this engine is actually all aluminum as well. Now, some of the things that would change. In the later cars, the fuse box would be taken out from under the dash, placed in that corner over there, and then things like the turbo would actually move around the air filter as well, but the turbo version of this car actually uses the same 2.5 liter engine, and then just adds a turbocharger and some other different accessories, obviously, to run the turbo in a long-term environment. But this is the same engine that gets turbocharged in the later generation Porsches. So some things that are super interesting about this car, this is the headlight mechanism right here. So some cars, early cars, will either actually use, not Porsches, but just in general, will actually use a vacuum system to operate their headlights. Things like C3 Corvettes will use a vacuum system. This uses an electric motor, which is attached to this bar that runs along the side there, which will actually open the headlights. It's essentially a glorified wiper motor is really all that it is. You'll see some of the Japanese cars will actually come with 2 headlight motors with 1 per each light, but this car is just the one run through a bar. Now this engine is super cool because over here we have our awesome Porsche valve cover, just reminding us the fact that we are driving a Porsche. So there are some speculation that this motor is essentially half of a 928, which is the bigger brother of the 944 that's V8 powered. It's essentially half of a 928's V8. Now, some of the other things that are cool, this car is actually equipped with cruise control. So you can see here, this is the cruise control mechanism. And one of the things that's a little bit sketchy is that, as you can see, it's cable driven. So what happens is when you activate the cruise control, you can feel the gas pedal fall to the floor. It's very sketchy when you do it in the car, but it has it, and I guess that's kind of cool in that regard. And this car even features fuel injection. This is a Bosch system, and it's actually very similar to the system that's used in the Lamborghini Countach. So this is basically a Lamborghini Countach. Now over here is the mass airflow sensor, essentially what directs everything to the throttle body that sits over here. And this is just a hefty unit. I've seen some people even go so far to modify these for things like high altitude, which I thought is super interesting because they don't adjust quite the way the modern stuff does. And then one of the things that's been changed on my car is this thing right here. So this is typically a different shape. It's almost more oblong. This has been upgraded to be circular, so it's a little bit more of a better throttle response, which I just prefer. And then if you look at things like the wiring back here, you'll notice this wiring looks to be in pretty good shape. Well, the reason for that is this car has actually caught on fire twice. So this little spot right here, this black circle, is from the second time the car caught fire, and the first time the car caught fire, I lost the ability to use my headlights. So what had happened is, with these cars, the wiring is a little bit touchy. And somewhere in the previous owner stint, this car started in California, worked its way through parts of Arizona, including making its way out to some lakes, and then eventually made its way to Phoenix, Arizona, where I picked it up. So during that time, somebody had installed higher wattage lights, and that overwhelmed the electric system. You're supposed to add relays when you do that because it's a non-relayed system in the car from the factory, and it fried the car. Now, since then, what I've done is I've ordered a factory new harness, which you can see some of the other videos on the channel where I go over some of that information. A brand new old stock factory harness, and essentially replaced it through the car, which took about a month to do. But since then, I've got hundreds of miles on the car, and it's performing fantastic, and I couldn't be happier. So now it's just on to some of the other modifications. So that's pretty much it for the engine bay. I should point out that this car makes roughly about 150 horsepower, give or take, which doesn't sound a whole lot, but this car only weighs 2,600 pounds. So the power to weight ratio is pretty good. It's not going to destroy everything on the road, but it's pretty quick for what it is. It's especially fast for the time. I think 0 to 60 is done, and it was something around 7.8 to 8.5 seconds, somewhere in there. But that's that. So that's kind of interesting. One of the things I do want to point out as we kind of go through the exterior, showed you the front bumper. We have some of the turn signals, which also change on the Euro versus the US cars. But here is one of the interesting things you won't see that often. Now, in the Porsche community, Fuchs wheels, which are the typical 5 spokes, are usually the famous wheels, or one of the things you'll see on the front engine cars are the phone dial wheels, and even the DT90s, which are like the multi-spokes, almost look like they should be on a Mercedes. These are called cookie cutters, and these only came on the early 944s, which would be about from 83 to 85 and a half before they made the adjustments. Now, one of the other things that I love about the 944 that changed versus the 924 are the fenders. So the 924 was a narrow body car, but if you look here, we have some really good boxy bits, as you can see by this body line right here, that really accents the front, and you can follow this body line to the back, boom, and then look at this. Big old 80s fender flares that look fantastic. And then another weird thing, just going over the general exteriors right here. So for whatever reason, the door handles use these triggers, and some of the things that were wrong with the cars when I bought it is these don't work, so you actually pull on the trigger to open the door, which is a pretty interesting, unusual thing. But another thing, this car is actually a hatchback, so this whole hatch lifts up. All you gotta do is grab your key, and then underneath this awesome rubber, it's actually pretty flexible, as you can see here, this rubber foam wing, this little key fob. It says Porsche in the wing too, which is kind of cool. It's a nice nod to things like the Porsche 930 Turbo. And then, boom. Yeah, you have a hatch, which is pretty interesting, makes it easy for storage. There's even things like the little pull-out thing. I'm afraid to pull it out because I don't know if it'll go back in if I pull it out. I've never messed with it since I bought the car, but it's even got the privacy hatch or to hide your stuff if you're shopping with your 944 or whatever you're doing. It even has a spare tire that sticks out right here, which is actually one of the inflatable spares. So it's not something that I would depend on. I have no clue how old this one is, but you actually pump it up with air on the side of the road. It even comes with an air compressor. Kind of a weird thing, but it's pretty cool. The weird thing about the hatch, though, that I would warn people with is I'm planning on getting this car tinted with the reflective stuff, not like black tint, but just the reflective sun stuff, because this hatch, for whatever reason, turns into a magnifying glass and will superheat the interior of the car. It gets quite hot. But anywho, coming around to the back, these bumpers stick out a bit more because it's a US car. I haven't decided if I'm going to change that or add a turbo valence or anything like that. My car does have a Dansk exhaust on it, so you can check out that video as well if you're interested. And I think the car sounds incredible with it. It's the only exhaust that I think really does the 4-cylinder in this car any good, because 4 cylinders, it's really easy to do them wrong with an exhaust, but I think the Dansk does this car justice. This is also an interesting component. This is not factory, so typically this is where the license plate will go. Dealerships added these plates afterwards. I forget the actual term for them. There's a German name that describes these plates that they would add on, but I've seen a bunch of different ones. I've seen Porsche 944, obviously I have the 944 one. I figured it's kind of a cool nod. It's period correct, so to speak, in terms of what would have been added on the car. Very cool nonetheless. There's not really any chrome on this car. Everything is black, and that's one of the things I appreciate about the car. I'm not a huge fan of chrome, so this is even cooler with that. Now, this car is a manual. Probably should have started with that, but if you take a quick look at the interior from this side, you can see right in the middle there is a 5-speed manual transmission that is shifted through the transaxle in the back of the car. Now, one of the other things, I'll go and run around to the other side. So, moving on to the interior, let's take a look in here. We have our 5-speed manual transmission. We have our older style gauges. If you take a look, these are the older style gauges that were only found in the early cars, and the tach actually runs this way, if you can see. So it goes from one and it runs this way, and the reason they did that is so when you're driving and you're looking like this out of the car, you can see the bottom of the tach is still visible, even though the steering wheel blocks the top. So that's a pretty clever idea, right? They know you want to see your tach. All the gauges and other stuff like that. And you can see that this car actually has 81,000 original miles, which is very cool indeed. We have our lights there for pop-up headlights, some vents, hazards, etc., oil pressure, all that good stuff. This is going to get replaced at some point with something more interesting. Some fold-up center console bits. No cup holders, which is unfortunate. That's just my American slobbiness, but whatever. Over here is the glove box, which opens up like this, as you can see. But more importantly, if you want to lock it, you lift the Porsche crest, boom, there you go, a lock. Pretty cool feature. You have the headlight switches and stuff in the door panels, which these run in a series, which is kind of weird. So if one works, it's the switch that's not working. Then over here is actually this video game looking toggle switch is for the mirrors, which is pretty interesting. And then of course, cruise control, turn signals, my Momo Prototipo steering wheel. And we have the back seats of the car. Now the back seats are kind of a joke. These are really not back seats at all. They are glorified grocery bag holders. Essentially, there's no leg room back there. Not really effective for anything. These aren't the sport seats, but tan and brown interior is what I have, and so I'll take that. So that's pretty much it. We're gonna go ahead and hop in the car and take it for a spin, just so you guys can hear what the car sounds like with the exhaust on the inside, and we'll go ahead and talk about the driving experience. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop in the car. All right. So, what is it like to drive a Porsche 944? So first of all, there's nothing crazy. If you want a super show car that's just gonna blast everybody away when it starts up, that is not the case. Like I said, this car does have an exhaust. We got our gauges and everything, which looks fantastic. And the cars, you really only feel, start to get underway here, the cars really only get some of the horsepower, and like you start to feel it a bit more when the car gets underway. So you really have to sort of get on it, kind of rev it out a little bit, and then you start to feel the power. So I'd say anywhere from like $3,000 on. So this car redlines about 6,500. So from about $3,000 to 6,500, it moves pretty good. But anything below that, it drives like your sort of standard economy car. Now the shifter is pretty good considering it's a transaxle, because what it is this shifter is essentially connected to a series of metal linkages that then run to the back of the transaxle. So it's not a super direct, there's not a click-clackety direct feeling to it, but it feels pretty good, and you can kind of throw it around when you're shifting it into gears. You throw it back and it feels like a good shift, and you can still kind of feel it moving the gears around. It's probably just one of those things where you want to make sure that it's properly lubricated and sort of set up, so to speak. And what I really want to talk about is the steering. The steering on these is really interesting. So this car does have power steering, but the steering is very firm and direct, and you really find your forearms working the wheel at low speeds. Once you're moving and you're underway at sort of like road driving speeds or sort of standard driving speeds, you don't notice it at all, but when you're not moving, boy, it's almost as if there's no power steering in the car at all. Now, that being said, even with the power steering and everything, this car has a very direct feel to it. I love driving this car because it feels like you're working for it to really enjoy your driving experience. Oh wow, that was leaving in second. Oh yeah. Gosh, this car is, I think this is one of those, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than it is to drive a fast car slow. And this car is a great example of that. This car is a ton of fun. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier is this car is almost guaranteed to get you a thumbs up or somebody to come up and start talking to you about the car anytime you take it for a drive, which is amazing. I love that about this car. It's very engaging as far as like talking to people in the car community. It's such a cool car to have and drive. God, I love this car. Oh, one of the things I didn't mention, we'll see if you can get it here when I start to turn. So this car came out in an era of fuel economy concerns as well. So it's got lower on the horsepower outside, but it's also got a catalytic converter and all sorts of stuff like that to make it US compliant. But if you look at the tach here in the middle, the car actually features a shift light. So as you're driving, a yellow light pops up telling you to shift, which is pretty interesting because it's not really an accurate shift light the way you'd find it in like modern cars, telling you to shift so you don't blow up the engine type of thing. It's more so like telling you to shift for economy. So there's even a fuel economy gauge that sits just above the tach telling you what it thinks your miles per gallon are as you're driving, which is, I'm guessing it's not even remotely accurate because it's just a gauge that I'm assuming guesses what your fuel economy is based off your pedal input. So it's just not remotely accurate. Because it acts like you could be getting 60 miles per gallon sometimes, but generally the fuel economy I would say is really good. It's a really small tank. It's somewhere in the range of 12 to 13 gallons, I think. But generally I'll get a lot of driving done out of it. I can't give you an exact range because I don't really keep that close tracking it, and generally you kind of drive it a little bit heavier, but it's great fuel economy nonetheless. As far as like seating position and stuff, it's not the most ergonomic car in the world, mostly because the steering wheel is not adjustable. So even though you can move some of the other things, the steering wheel is stuck where it is. So if you have big legs or you just need more room, generally you can't fit in this car. As you can see, my legs are a bit bigger and they sit just below the steering wheel here. One of the things you can fix is you can lean the seat back a little bit more, you get a little bit more headroom. But yeah, that's my biggest concern about my biggest complaint really would be the seating position, because you can't really adjust the steering wheel. One of the things you can do is it is slightly angled, so if you add a spacer, you can put the steering wheel out and that'll lift it just a little bit higher. But for the most part, there's not a ton you can do in that department. So that's pretty much what it's like to drive the 944. It's a fantastic car to drive. If you ever get the chance to do it, I strongly recommend it. But if you're looking for a fast car, that's not this car, but I think it's quirky, it's gorgeous. You don't see them that often. It's got pop-up headlights. It's just a really fun car to have. So that's what I would say there. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I'm more than happy to share them with them. I love this car. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And if you like this video, throw me a like. I'd really appreciate it. And get subscribed as I post videos regularly. With that, thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.